Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as CVWV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. In today's first segment, we welcome Delegate Amy Summers from Taylor County. She is the chair of the Committee on Health and Human Resources, has been a main architect in the effort to improve the DHHR. Also with us is Charles Young, West Virginia News' senior government affairs reporter. And we're going to be talking about this pending split of the state's largest agency, the Department of Health and Human Resources. Welcome, Delegate Summers and Charles. Delegate Summers, would you like to kick it off by telling us where we're at with this bill?
The DHHR reorganization bill is in the Senate on third reading and should pass today.
Okay, great. Well, I wanted to delve into a little bit of the specifics of this. One of the things about this being a net neutral budget, in terms of cost, is the requirement in the bill to formulate these plans to eliminate some existing DHHR positions. Can we talk about what those positions are? How many do we think we can get rid of?
The DHHR has a 24% vacancy currently, and we don't want those to be any of the frontline workers, but some of the upper level bureaucrats could be eliminated.
Okay, well, what within the bill, tell us about the guidelines of forming the plan. That plan of what we want to eliminate is actually due in June, is that correct?
The plan will be developed by the new secretaries and people that currently work there, and they'll come back to us. And what we hope that they do is they have currently an office, COO, Chief Operating Officer. That will stay in code, but it just changes names, Office of Shared Administration. And they will decide what functions can they continue to assume and what functions need to be in the new departments. And we expect them to work together and formulate what works best.
When you were talking about this bill on the floor, you talked about all of the work that's gone on for, going on 3 years now that's incorporated into this bill. One of the elements that you said, is in the final bill is some of the information from our $1.3 million McChrystal report. I was kind of curious, were you being diplomatic when you said that? Was it really necessary for us to spend $1.3 million on this report? Is that information really in there, or could the interim committee have gotten that on their own?
The governor felt it was important to do it and to have an independent study and look at that. So I respect that. What that report told us, though, is that communication is one of the biggest issues that they're having in this organization. And we talk about how it's so large that it's too difficult to manage. And such vertical bureaucracy, right? So many layers to get through to get to the chief. And so the McChrystal report highlighted that as being one of the major problems. So we thought that was important to say. The DHHR current makeup also said that they had the money. The McChrystal report said it would take $2 million to implement the changes that they had. They said they had the money to do that without asking for any increases in their budget. So we also knew there was $2 million of available funds that they felt they could use to institute some of the changes that we're suggesting, or that we're going to actually pass in law.
So, as it stands today, when it passes today, does it go to the governor at that point, or do we still have to bring the House and the Senate together to iron out anything?
No, it did not get amended yesterday in the Senate. It will be on third reading today. It will pass, and then it will go to the governor.
Okay, very good. And you mentioned, in when we were talking previous to production there, that this bill has had pretty good support across the board. It's going to pass. There's no question about that, unless something really bizarre happens today on third reading. Do you think, to see Republicans, Democrats wholeheartedly support this effort, does that just cry out how broken the DHHR has been?
It just cries out that we need to make a change. So we've been doing this structure for 34 years, since 1989, and we're still seeing way too many failures and too many problems. And our constituents that have issues come to us and expect us to make changes and to make things happen and to improve things. It's really hard for us as a 60-day legislature to be able to tackle anything with a organization that's this large. The size kind of hides issues and makes it difficult to tackle any kind of problem. And the funding, also the money, is very not transparent. And so it's hard for us to eliminate programs by saying we want to set up in our budget moving forward, we want to break down all the programs, and we want to set up benchmarks. If you don't meet this is somewhere that perhaps we don't need to spend tax dollars, and we need to move that money to other areas where it does need spent.
Now, it's important that our viewers understand, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is an agency that also receives a great deal of federal money. So the state legislature will only be able to kind of navigate the funding on the state level. The federal money is earmarked and designated for specific things, correct?
It is earmarked for certain things, but if it's a program that we're accepting federal dollars for and it's not producing results, we don't have to have that program.
Okay. And there's a lot of shared type deals. Very seldom is a program just state money or just federal money, correct?
Right. There's usually a match.
Okay. Is there any concern, and you've been in this, you've been working on it, probably no one knows it better than you at this point in time. Is there any concern about that, coordination of funding mechanism? I could see that kind of being a problem maybe down the road.
Well, that's why we have the Office of Shared Administration. Someone in that office currently now manages all of those federal dollars and divvies them out where they're supposed to go. And then each department will have their own finance person that works with them to coordinate things. But you can see DHHR has a lot of memorandums of understanding with different departments. Department of Education, they fund things there. The prison systems, they fund things there. They share monies and do this in other means. There's no reason that they can't be successful sharing monies and distributing where it needs to go in just 3 departments.
You said something earlier that, I've been paying state taxes for a long time now, and, as a taxpayer, and I think the legislature understands that, but you said something earlier about you don't want to eliminate the frontline positions. Those are often the positions you guys are struggling, or the DHHR is struggling to fill. But obviously the legislature thinks there's some backline positions or higher up positions that can kind of be cut away here.
Well, and it might not be a particular person. With the 24% vacancy rate, there's a position, obviously, that hasn't been filled. So we might just be able to eliminate those positions. But the legislature won't do that. We are counting on the secretaries that run the new departments to figure out what is crucial, what is necessary, and what do we need to keep, and what do we not need to keep.
Well, that kind of brings us to something else with the DHHR. You mentioned the secretaries, and those positions have yet to be filled. Dr. Jeff Coben, I believe, is the interim director. Is there any hope that you guys can sway him to stay on, or is it pretty clear he's just an interim?
I think he expressed that he just wanted to be an interim, but maybe now that he's got his feet wet, maybe he'll like it and see, I can really make a difference in the state and in these people's lives. So maybe he'll have a new calling, but I'm sure that if he was interested, he'd be considered. He's been very easy to work with. He understands our concerns. He's been listening to us. So I think he would be a great candidate if he chose to put his hat in the ring.
Before we move on, Charles, anything else you have on DHHR you'd like to ask?
Well, I was just going to ask you to expand on that a little bit about your work with Dr. Coben and what input he's given. I know he's only been on the job a few months, so he's only coming in at this tail end of the process. Did he give any input that's in the bill?
We met with the House Health Committee, brought in different executives and spoke to them. We asked for their input into different sections of the bill that might impact them. is there anything we're missing? Is there any way we can phrase something differently? And they all sent us input that we tried to incorporate into the bill, things that we could, things that we didn't think were pertinent, we didn't. But we did try to take their suggestions and put that in there.
This is such a big bill, and unless somebody has something else to add, this will be the last one. But I mean, do you think we've got it right now? Do you think we have it right?
I think actually this is just a first step, and we're going to be coming back year after year after year, tweaking this and evaluating it and making changes. But what we do know is the current thing we're doing isn't working, so we have to make changes. We've maybe made a change that doesn't work. I mean, we'll have to just keep after this year after year. And I just want your viewers to know this isn't going to solve anything initially. This is just a first step on the structure. Then we have to get the right people in the right positions. But it will allow us, in health particularly, to now zero in and hold those particular secretaries accountable for what's underneath of them in the structure.
Delegate Summers, Amy, we appreciate your directness, and you have definitely shed some great light on this. We're going to segue to a couple other issues here. Charles, I know the PEIA is still out there, and also the income tax issue. Amy, let's start with the income tax issue. Where do you think that stands? Have you been involved in any of the negotiations going on? I know you've been really busy with DHHR.
Yeah, I have not been, but our caucus is talking, and we are sharing what we'd like to see go forward. We have possession of the Senate bill now, which is different than what the House proposed. But what can we agree to? What can we not agree to? We're talking about those things now. We want to end this session with a tax cut for our people. So we will work with them and try to come up with an agreement and be able to do that for the people of West Virginia.
Charles, I know you were kind of watching the PEIA stuff develop late in the day yesterday. Any questions on where that stands right now?
Well, I was going to say, I think that's kind of been a recurring theme of our weekly episodes this session, is trying to track if we are going to come out of this session with a long-term fix for PEIA, or if this is going to be yet another year of one-time appropriations. Everyone is saying that we've talked to this year said it's a little bit of both. It's going to be another year of one-time appropriations that lead us towards a larger fix. You think that's going to be successful?
I do think it's going to be successful. We have seen the projections and the amount of money that's going to take to sustain PEIA in its current form, and it's not sustainable. So we have been pushed that we must do something. And I introduced a bill this year that's similar to the plan that the Senate is running. And so we've been talking about this together the whole session and even prior to session. So we're kind of on the same page, the House and the Senate, on what we need to do. And so it's not going to be easy. I mean, this is, it's got a spousal component where if they get insurance elsewhere, they're not going to be able to have PEIA unless they buy into it. That's going to be, people aren't going to like that, but we cannot afford the plan as it is currently. We've got to make some drastic changes.
Do you think that the bill will proceed through the Senate then and be, and then move over to the House, and you guys will address that?
Yes, that is what I'm anticipating. I think the Senate will get that bill out and send to us, and I think we'll pass that and get that to the governor.
I know that there's some drastic things in terms of the way PEIA has been operated, but if you compare it to the way most private sector operates, what you guys are asking are very similar in the 80-20 matches and different things. I think the premiums, the one thing I did not understand, and you might be able to explain it, is there's something about an administrative fee, and if the administrative fee reaches $75 million, then the premiums only go up 12 to 14%. But if it doesn't reach that amount, the premiums could go up as high as 26 or 28%. Are you aware of any of that language?
No, that's probably too down in the weeds for me today to answer, because the bill's been evolving a little bit and what's the final form going to be. But it's a lot to ask taxpayers who are not state employees, whose insurance is going up dramatically every year for the last, 8 years, to continue to fund not only their insurance, but the state employees. And we recognize it's a benefit for them, and we want to help them have good insurance, but it's getting to the point where it's too costly for us to expect that of the other taxpayers of the state.
I think that's a real good point and something that's been brought up before. And you get arguments on both sides of the equation, but as lawmakers, you've got to do what's best for the greater good, not just a specific element. We obviously want great state employees. We want great educators. Absolutely crucial to what we do. With the pay raises, do you believe the pay raises will go through without any problems and things like that?
I do think the pay raise will go through, and what they're trying to structure is that the pay raise is more than what the insurance will go up. So while you won't really benefit with money in your pocket from the pay raise, your insurance increase in cost will be covered.
And that's from my perspective, that would be about the best you can hope for, because we all know the rising cost of health care. Delegate Summers, Amy, we really appreciate you being with us today. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss? Or Charles, did you have any closing questions?
No, sir. I was about to ask the same thing about the pay raise, but thank you. Anything else you'd like to add, Delegate?
Okay, I'd just like to say it's day 43. We've got 17 days to go. Sometimes people get worried. They don't see anything happening, but then all of a sudden at the end, in the last 2 weeks, everything comes together and the session ends. And so we're hoping to get tax cuts, improvements to PEIA, the reorganization of DHHR. If we can accomplish those three things, that will be a very successful session, in my opinion.
I think most West Virginians would agree with you. We really appreciate you have shed more light on the DHHR bill and the DHHR situation than anyone we've had on. We appreciate your hard work. We know you've been burning the midnight oil to get those things accomplished. Delegate Amy Summers from Taylor County, who chairs the House Health and Human Resources Committee, thank you for being with us. This is Legislature This Week, and we'll be right back after this message.
Your heart is in the best hands. Mont Health Heart and Vascular is the highest-ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose Mont Health. Feel the difference.
Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA WB and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. Today, we welcome Clay Riley, a delegate from Harrison County, as well as a professional engineer. Clay, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me today, John. Appreciate it.
Also with us is Charles Young. He's our senior government affairs reporter at West Virginia News. Charles, why don't you get us started?
All righty. Good morning, Clay. How are you?
Good, Charles. How are you today?
Doing well. Thanks for joining us. Well, so I know this is your second year down in Charleston, your second regular session down there. Do you feel like you're fully acclimated to the legislative process and how things work, or is there still a learning curve for you at this point, 2 years in?
I think, Charles, that ultimately you will learn something every year you're down here if you're down here for 20 years. And, I always used the analogy before that I was still trying to figure out where the bathrooms are. And this year I've said, sort of the sophomore, I'm a wise fool, so I think I know it all. No, just joking with that. But in seriousness, you have a better feel for the process. But there is still a learning curve because state government is so big and there are so many issues and there are so many different perspectives from around the state that you have to look at them from a very multifaceted view. So yes, it is always a learning curve.
Well, and then we had the redistricting process in between your terms there, so I'm sure that kind of recalibrated your governing priorities, right?
It did. So last year, obviously, I had all of Harrison County and a little sliver of Taylor. And with the redistricting process, I picked up a large part of Wetzel County. So I go down to the far side of Pine Grove and all the way up to along Big Run, almost about a mile outside of 100. So it's a big area, trying to get to know the people down there. So I knocked on a lot of doors. I saw a lot of people during the campaign. But it is a different it's a different demographic, a different population, I should say, not demographic. It's very similar to rural Harrison County, where I am, in Wallace and Lumberport and Shinston. So they have a lot of the same beliefs. It's just getting to know the people.
You mentioned that, and the minute you started talking about that, I'm thinking of West Virginia 20 down through Brown and Dola and all those fun areas. I figure infrastructure comes up a lot in your discussions with folks down in that direction.
Infrastructure comes up a whole lot down in that area, whether it's the natural gas infrastructure, or whether it's broadband, water, wastewater, stormwater, or more importantly, even roads. So yes, I've heard a lot from different perspectives. And that's a heavy oil and gas area, heavy timber area, so they have heavier trucks. And it's rural. So there's a lot of roads, and being able to connect them all and be able to have good conditions of roads is really important.
Well, you talked about a lot of differing views, and if there's a bill down there that has a lot of differing views, it's all the tax negotiation that's going on. And you serve on the House Finance Committee, correct?
Yes, I do.
And so where's that at right now, Clay? Tell us a little bit where you think those negotiations stand. Are we close to a deal?
It's a great question, and I can tell you one of the things that sort of came out about this early on, the governor's initial proposal the night of the State of the State was out, and then the next day House Finance passed it to send it over to the Senate. And some people thought that was really quick, but I can tell you, House Finance and the House side of this chamber had been really analyzing how we could get tax reduction over the past 3 years. So having a good historical trend allowed us to be able to move quickly on that bill. I think the Senate has some different perspectives, and they have been very thoughtful as well. So as you begin to work through the negotiations and you figure out where can we give the most back to all the citizens of the state of West Virginia is really where it comes down to sort of refining it. I think that those negotiations are continuing to go along well. I think that the House, the Senate, and the governor all are listening very well, which is really optimistic. So when you have the House, the governor, and the Senate all working towards the same goal of getting money back into West Virginians' pocket, and maybe on a path to zero for PIT long term, that's really important.
Do you agree with, we had Senate President Blair on last week, and he said, well, we're not going to, we don't think the governor's numbers are right because we're not counting the $1 billion in surplus that is from the severance taxes. So, do you think that's fair to do that to the people of West Virginia? Because it definitely cuts in. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't think there's anything sexy about a 15% income tax cut. I mean, it's better than none, but when you talk going from 50 to 15, it's kind of a letdown, I think, for normal taxpayers.
Well, you can say that, but you have to be very cognizant of what your long-term impacts are. So you look at the PEIA issue that's outstanding, and you have some structural deficiencies there. So trying to look a little further down the road and maybe taking a measured approach to it. And I think everyone has the same intention of getting as much money back to West Virginians. And maybe you come in with a little bit bigger initial, but you have some triggers or something along the lines where you can say, how do we get there long term? And I would not disparage anybody for taking a really hard look at this, whether it's the governor, the Senate, the House, and really diving into the numbers, because there's no way you get it perfect the first time. And so taking a very measured approach and looking really hard at the numbers, I think, is the wise thing to do.
Charles, you've got the next one, I think.
Yes, sir. Well, Clay, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, some of the bills you have sponsored this session. It seems like, you are bringing your decades in engineering to bear on some of these, at least on the House side. It seems like you're, carving out this niche for yourself as the guy to go to for wastewater issues, ground issues. Talk about that. Those aren't necessarily headline-grabbing things, but they're important.
Well, they are important. And, one of the reasons that I ran, as I said, I've done this for 20 years across the Mid-Atlantic, and I can bring expertise from around the nation to West Virginia so that we can make things a little bit easier. So a couple of the bills that I'm running is a wastewater reciprocity bill. Seems very innocuous, but if you are in that industry, you see a lot of people kind of retiring out. and it's not a profession where new people are coming in. So being able to ease the burden of somebody coming in and getting them hired is really important. One of the other major initiatives that the West Virginia House has taken on over the past few years is protecting water quality. And when you look at, there's a bill out there, it's the PFAS bill, and I'm sure that's going to be catching a lot of headlines soon. The state has really taken a proactive look at this. And 2 years ago, we started an initiative to study where these PFAS chemicals are. This past year, I chaired the State Water Resources Interim Study Commission, and we had a presentation from USGS about where those were found. It was 37 water sources that the PFAS was above the health advisory. So we're running this bill so that we can begin to get upstream and really minimize the impact of what these improvements that are going to come down from EPA, minimize the impact on public water systems and ultimately their ratepayers. So I do applaud the House and the Senate as well, because they've worked hand in hand with us to be able to try to get this across the goal line.
And where does that bill stand currently?
So that bill in the House, has been reported out of Judiciary and is up for a first reading today. So it's moving. The Senate ran it out of their Ag Commission, their Ag Resources, and it's in their Judiciary. And they're they're actually the exact same similar bill. They took the House version and they did a strike and insert on the Senate version. So we've had a lot of cooperation and a lot of positive movement on that to protect water quality.
Well, and the other thing I know we wanted to ask you about is the PEIA bill. I know this is on the Senate side right now. It looks like, we are going to be trying to take, this broad-ranging, attempt to fix this. I think as it stands now, this is a 60-something page bill. Like I said, it's still on the Senate side. Are you tracking that and kind of getting prepared for it to come your way?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to pay a little bit of attention to what's going on the other side. So crossover day comes next week. So that's when you really focus on all the Senate bills. But you have to pay attention. And so last night, the Senate Subcommittee C, and Senate Finance held a hearing. They brought out their report from the PEI bill. They showed some of the structural deficiencies that long-term loom, and they had some concepts of how you begin to deal with some of that. And I believe it was about a $400 million deficit in 2027, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, it's 376 to 400. In 5 years with inflation, it'll be 400, okay, at least. Now, part of that bill is calling for changes in spousal coverage, changes in premiums from, making sure that employees are paying 20% of premiums as well as co-pays, I believe. Talking about some type of actuarial fee that has to hit $75 million. If it doesn't, then the rates could jump up 25%. I mean, what do you think the response from state employees, especially educators? Are you concerned about that?
Well, yeah, you're obviously concerned about all your state employees. And when you look at these types of things, that you absolutely have to have that in mind. I've not looked at all the details. I do know the 80/20 was something that has been in code and I think has been there before. And so I think what they're looking to do with the actuarial side of the PA Finance Board is to make sure that they're giving correct and factual estimates and that they have a responsibility to be able to adjust that. So yeah, you absolutely pay attention to how that impacts all your citizens. And, and if you have a situation where you do the PEIA, you can get the pay raise and you do a tax cut. And if you can roll those together, I think that's really where a lot of people are trying to head, I'm not sure how all that fits together because I haven't seen it come out of the Senate yet, but I know that's been some of the conversation to make sure that our public employees are taken care of.
So basically the hope is that the pay raises and perhaps the tax cuts even help to cover any of the increases that state employees could be seeing.
Well, I can't speak for everyone in the entire House, but I can tell you that a lot of conversation about how all these structural fixes go together. There's been a lot of conversation, whether it's comprehensive tax reform, multiple aspects of that, PEIA, how it fits together, pay raise. Everything rolls together and connects because ultimately they all have an impact.
Would you like to make a prediction on when you think we'll have a tax deal?
No.
Now, come on, Clay.
So
Go ahead.
So one thing I have learned in the past, you asked earlier about learning curve. Learning curve is you never make a prediction on where a bill's going to go or how it's going to turn out.
Well, that is fair. I thought we'd catch you off guard a little bit, But anything else you'd like to call attention to our audience back here in north central West Virginia and throughout the Mountain State? Is the session going as well as you can hope for?
I think it is. I think you've really seen a lot of, I don't want to say, I guess I would say cooperation. You've seen a lot of hard work by the delegates. When you have 100 members on the House and 34 on the Senate, around the state, different perspectives, but there's been a lot of active listening this year. And I can tell you, I think it's been more than I've seen in the past 2 years. So I really feel that the House, the Senate, and the governor are all really pulling for West Virginia to come together. Specific to some of my bills that I've been leading and working on, one I'd love to bring attention to is Chairman Capito, Chairman of Judiciary, has a road optimization and assessment data bill. It's a road pilot project where he's using artificial intelligence and machine learning to be able to assess the roads so we can do predictive analysis rather than reactive repairs to road so that you can get ahead of schedule. It's really cutting edge, really smart, and I'm glad to be a sponsor on that bill as well. I was really excited about that one. One of the other ones is I think you've seen some of the evolution of the gambling industry with iGaming and apps of sort. I'm leading a bill that just passed out of House Judiciary yesterday that's really a consumer protection bill that allows for these handicappers who come in and say, I guarantee an 85% winning rate, that it begins to audit them so that we can put confidence in the people who use these and not get scammed and really take the bad actors out so we can protect West Virginians. And, there has to be a balance between that.
Excellent. Clay, always appreciate your insight and everything. I wonder, can we check, are the odds makers predicting when the West Virginia may have a tax plan announcement? Or anyway, Clay, we appreciate you very much, and you always bring, you remind me a lot of Representative McKinley and his scientific expertise that he brought to the U.S. House for years. It's good having you down there focused on infrastructure, because heavens knows we definitely have to focus on that in West Virginia. Anything else you'd like to close with? Or Charles, any closing comment from you, my friend?
No, I just want to say thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you. And I appreciate the compliment and kind of comparing me to Congressman McKinley. I think it was a great asset to the state of West Virginia and the United States as a whole. And I think, as you talk about infrastructure, it is a major issue that we are leading on. We've allocated $250 million last year. I think the governor's proposed $177 million additional this year. So we are absolutely trying to maximize our resources to serve the citizens of West Virginia.
Excellent. That is Clay Riley from Harrison County. This is Legislature This Week, and we will be right back after this important message.
Here's the better opportunity you're looking for. Enhancing health and wellness of our community, one patient at a time. Apply today at monhealth.com/careers. Choose Mon Health. Feel the difference.
Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA WV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. Joining us now is Don Smith, the Executive Director of the West Virginia Press Association. Welcome, Don.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here, John.
Also with us is Charles Young, West Virginia News' Senior Government Affairs Reporter. Charles, go right ahead.
Hi, Don. How are you this morning?
Very good, Charles. Very good. Good to see you.
You too. Well, I was hoping we could start by you talking a little bit about the Press Association itself for folks who might not know about it. You're a familiar face around the Capitol, but tell us a little bit about, what you guys do in the role you serve.
Well, the Press Association represents all 70 newspapers. West Virginia is very fortunate that we have a newspaper, at least one, in all of our 55 counties. So the association is here monitoring legislation, working with legislators, trying to answer any questions they have that deal with FOIA, that deal with public notice, We watch all the bills coming through. We follow the process to try and keep it as transparent as possible. We monitor any legislation that would impact, again, I mentioned public notice, legal, which some people refer to, legal advertising. A lot of times we are just meeting with legislators to talk about issues they may not think about, how this bill would impact citizens and the media's ability to cover a meeting or to get that information back. And sometimes it's just meeting with them to get the information back. A lot of legislatures will call and say, hey, this is an important bill. There are a lot of bills up here. Can you make sure that your folks in the media are aware of this? We host events, we handle Zoom calls, so we really try to serve as a bridge between our publications, our communities, and our legislators.
Okay, great. Could you tell us a little bit about the student journalism bill that you mentioned before we got on the air? That's one you said you guys are following this session?
Yeah, it's an interesting bill. We are following numerous bills, but one that's moving right now is Senate Bill 121, which is now in the House, and it deals with ensuring that all student journalists have the ability to have access to free speech, the ability to get their information published. I should really make sure that I'm clear on this. We have no issues that we're aware of in West Virginia where this has been a problem. Our universities and colleges have been great about this. They've been proactive, which is really good. But nationally, I think there have been some situations where maybe a journalist felt he was censored because of his political beliefs. He couldn't get something in the paper. There have even been situations at some universities around the country where they have had to come in and say, you need to declare this a free speech zone so that these students can get up and talk and not feel intimidated. Whether it's from a liberal pressure or conservative pressure, it shouldn't matter. Students should have access and be able to speak their minds. And this bill is a national bill. Senator Azinger is the sponsor in the Senate. And he's worked on it for a couple years. I've talked to him about this bill. I know that it is a bill that is being introduced nationally in all states, and it's in different places across the country, but it's been a good bill that way. We are in favor of I'm sorry, John. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. What were you going to say there?
The Press Association, like so many groups here, we support free speech. We don't care what the speech, everyone should have a right to express themselves. And we are very careful to advise our legislators not to limit someone's speech and access.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I was headed down the limiting the access, because there's been an effort every year now for as long back as I can remember to do away with some of the public notice regulations that require, hey, you forgot to pay your taxes and they're about to sell your property, or right. all different things that have to be published legally to give the public and individuals the ability to see that information. Where do we stand with any effort? I know there was a bill earlier this year that was going to reduce the amount paid to newspapers down to 4 cents a word or something like that. Mm-hmm. Are we in pretty good shape of keeping that information available to the public?
The newspaper industry and the people of West Virginia have been very fortunate that over the last few years the Press Association and our papers have worked together with leadership, and leadership understands the value of public notice and what the threat to the public is. We have some legislators who view it differently or don't support that as much, and there are always bills that come in. Those bills don't seem to be moving, and again, I give credit to Senate President Blair, to House Speaker Hanshaw, and many of the committee chairs who sit down with their delegates, and we meet with them and say, this is why this is probably a bad bill. And I don't think it's ill intent as much as it is lack of information, maybe education in an area where they don't understand the value of that. So I don't expect those bills to move. Now, we do have some situations where one particular legal may be at risk, where a public notice for some singular government action, and it was struck from a bill. And we try to go back and get that put in. sometimes in the process, it's difficult to get that back in. But overall, I think we look very good.
I know another aspect of the Press Association, and really all of its members, I know we emphasize it here, the right to open meetings for the public to have access on the lower levels, the local water board, the local PSDs, all your city councils and things like that. Do you feel West Virginia is open enough, or are there still too many loopholes to allow government to slide behind closed doors?
I think there are still too many loopholes. We tend to add more exemptions to the FOIA Act, which I'm not in favor of. It is a mindset that is not just in West Virginia, but it's nationally, that government should be able to move quickly and at their will. That is not the American way. They need to have, it's democracy. You need to tell people. One of the things I think that's missing when we talk about public notice is it's advance notice. It's mass to the public, and anytime you see a legal ad or you hear someone talk about public notice, it's not about something that has happened. It's about something that's going to happen, and if it's in your community, it's going to impact you. Legal notices by code are said to be done in advance and in the area impacted. So when people look at the legal ads in their paper, each one of those is about something that's coming up, and they should really pay attention. However, to your point, John, a lot of government people, some people in government say, well, that's just slowing the process down. That's keeping me from doing what I want to do. I was elected to do what I want to do. And I can understand that mindset, as I'm sure you can as an editor, but the public has a right to know what you're doing and a right to comment on it. And government should be slowed at times. If it's a crisis, there are exemptions to allow things to happen. But in the general legislative process, there needs to be time for public comment, for public input, and that's what FOIA and open meetings and legal ads allow. Having a meeting and not allowing the media in there, and there are loopholes where they can go into executive sessions or form certain groups that aren't as accessible, and that's never good. And unfortunately, in government, we've seen this year, and we see every year, there are problems. Whether it is an individual who is using it for his own gain, whether it is someone who has gotten involved in, say, drugs or alcohol, and they end up doing the wrong thing. Our papers cover that type of thing in all 55 counties. And sometimes it's not dramatic, but it's not dramatic or common because we cover it and we're aware and we watch it. If we weren't watching, I think those types of fraud, embezzlement, theft, and just people getting themselves into trouble would happen a lot more often.
Well, and I think it's important that our viewers understand, like with the legal notices, we're also talking about, bids for high-dollar public projects that, allow more companies to be involved with possibly getting the bid, and allows for those companies to have to compete for that business. Whereas if you didn't have that public notice and you didn't have those requirements, a 5-member council or something could give it to, the local guy down the road on a non-bid situation. Those types of public notices help government operate more efficiently. It may slow it down a little bit, but hopefully it saves us money in the long term. You mentioned the speed of government, and that's been used a number of times from Senator Blair last week with us, and it's come up a couple times today. But in terms of what developed, like with the PEIA situation and the bill that's going to affect hundreds of thousands of state employees and their insurance, that bill happened on very short notice. It hasn't passed. Hopefully there'll be some public hearings and more discussion, but it is a very big, drastic change. What are your thoughts when that type of legislation just seems to appear out of thin air?
I'm opposed to that type of legislation, whether it's at a city council meeting in Clarksburg or a commission meeting in Kanawha County or here at the Capitol. When a very complicated big issue comes out and they have the answer already, that tells everyone that we didn't get any public input. We're going to do what we want to do. And they have, whether it's now or 20 years ago, government can do what it wants to do, but it needs to share the information. I am very opposed to those big sweeping bills that are worked out behind closed doors. They're not discussed on the floor to any extent. There aren't public hearings. I think our leaders are trying to do a good job, and I think for the most part they do, but I do think there are times they get caught up in the process, and it speeds them along a little too quickly. It impacts, John, that's a great question, because it impacts so many people, John, in the state, and everyone cares.
Absolutely. And I mean, it impacts taxpayers, it impacts those directly affected on the insurance policies. And let's make it very clear, I don't think any of us think PEIA is fixed, and there needs to be some fixes, but that needs to be done, in the light of day, as they say.
Right. And a lot of these employees in the state saw the PEIA situation, the insurance benefits, as something that they took instead of salary. And when the legislature changes from year to year or from party to party, it's like we have a different viewpoint. And for the employees, they're thinking, well, I was told one thing, and now I'm being told something else. So it's very important that it's explained to them and they know what's going on.
Charles?
Well, Don, I just wanted to ask you to go back to the public notice issue. I know several years ago, I think maybe it was during the 2019 or 2020 session, there was discussion of making an online centralized database for these notices. Obviously, I think that never came to fruition. Has that idea come back into discussion this time around?
Yes, actually, there is a legislation that passed that requires the state to have all of their public notices on an online database handled by the auditor's office. State Auditor J.B. McCuskey monitors that, and he has been a very big supporter of public notice. It's very important. This year there is one to get cities, counties, and everyone else to submit their information. And that's moving through the process. It's been through one chamber into the other. Whether it will pass, I don't know. There's a lot more moving parts at the county and municipal level than there are at the state level. So getting that to happen in a timely fashion is a big issue. Our newspapers, we as the third party looking in, the fourth arm, however you look at it, we have westvirginialegals.com that we put legals on that is not monitored by the government. One of our concerns, we're big supporters of online access. Our websites, our papers are all getting more online and providing more services. But one of the things we are concerned with is if government maintains its own website with its own legals, it just creates a situation where abuse is all too easy.
Absolutely. You mentioned J.B. McCuskey. We have to, while we question some elements of government, it is important to note that the auditor's office with their transparency portal, it's a lot easier to access. Don and I have been in this business for a long time, and we remember when you had to go to Charleston and dig through all the files to find out what somebody was making. And nowadays, they've done a great job in the auditor's office making that information readily available to taxpayers, and we do give kudos for that. Don, anything you'd like to add to wrap up?
Well, actually, adding to your point, JB in the auditor's office has done a tremendous job. Mac Warner in the Secretary of State's office has done a tremendous job. They are two real champions of open government and access, so we thank both of those. We work with both of those officials on a regular basis. And I have to say the same with Senator Blair and Speaker Hanshaw. We get access to them. They come to our events and speak. They share information, and really that's important.
Absolutely, and you're exactly right. Mac Warner and his team down there with elections, businesses, and big champions of open meetings, and we do appreciate them as well. We've been fortunate to have a strong Secretary of State and auditors there, so we appreciate their efforts. Don, we appreciate your efforts, and we certainly appreciate you joining us here for Legislature This Week.
Your heart is in the best hands. Mon Health Heart and Vascular is the highest ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose Mon Health. Feel the difference.
Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA WV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. We're glad to have Randy Yohe, the West Virginia Public Broadcasting Governmental Affairs Reporter, as well as Charles Young, West Virginia News' Government Affairs Reporter. And we're going to go back and forth on some big issues. Randy, what's going on in the Capitol on day 43?
Well, Joe Manchin's glad-handed with everybody right now, just walking by me. So everybody is always happy when our government senator is here in town. I just left Rules Committee. There's been some unusual activity in the House the last couple of days. They suspended operations yesterday, then reconvened at 8 o'clock last night, hardly did anything. A number of bills that were on third reading have been moved over to the House calendar, which means that they're not to be considered, and they only moved 2 of those back today, and they're kind of deal with nondescript issues. So there's some behind-the-scene politicking going on that's offering some challenges and some concerns on leadership. And I'm still trying to figure all that out. Charles, do you have any insight on all this craziness?
No, I was just about to ask about the campus carry bill yesterday. I saw that, the speaker was one of the few Republicans that, voted, against that measure. I wondered if that played into any of our leadership issues.
I'm told no. I'm told that it all had to do with an issue before everything really got started on tabling a motion that Delegate Brandon Steele out of Raleigh County had made regarding vaccinations. He's an anti-vaxxer, and I think that he tried to get some rules changed, and I think maybe leadership didn't appreciate, I'm trying to say this tactfully, didn't appreciate what had happened, and I think that's what got some of these non-standard balls in motion.
So how much, does it put any legislation at risk, you think? Or what's going on here? Or
there's a couple of things. There was, some things that were taken off the special calendar was, concern for naloxone treatment centers not being close to pain centers and having some of that control over that. There's an oil and gas Bill 3110 that deals with inspections of all of our gas and oil wells, because I understand that we don't have enough inspectors maybe with the state environmental department. That's been put to the side. So those are a couple right now that seem to affect taxpayers and people that live in West Virginia.
Do you foresee any other difficulties emerging? Or, we talked about insight into this, and I was talking to Delegate Riley earlier about trying to handicap when we might see a tax deal, and he said he didn't want any part of predicting when that might happen. A lot of things still up in flux right now.
I predict even more flux as we go on. That seems to be the nature of the beast right now. I just talked to a finance committee member, Delegate Larry Rowe, who said that there was just a release, if we want to talk about taxes a little bit, from the state tax department, a fiscal note, if you will, that where Eric Tarr has figured that the Senate tax proposal, with those breakdowns that we've talked about before, 15%, 50% for small businesses and their business and inventory tax, so on and so forth, would cost about $600 million. And Larry Rowe handed me a paper right here that I haven't had time to peruse, but it boils down to figuring that the Senate proposal is going to cost about $740 million. So that's $140 million off. And I'm told that there's not a lot of T's crossed and I's dotted, that there's concern that this didn't go through committee, that this was just pushed out without the proper vetting, which is kind of the same thing that's happening with PEIA, if I'm not mistaken. So, no, there's still going to be flux. We're going to have plenty of flux.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Their estimates on the 50% cut on machinery and inventory tax only being around $200 million, I think, is what Senator Blair was saying last week. That seemed awfully low to me when you compared it to what they were saying Amendment 2 would have done if the tax had been totally eliminated. Because we were talking 700 or 800 million then. So, there's some big questions there, I'm sure. Another thing that came out late yesterday, and again, something that kind of flew under the radar, and now all of a sudden we have the Senate looking at a PEIA updated bill that's going to change spousal insurance, is my understanding, make them pay more to buy into the system, also change premium rates, and also something about an actuarial fee not reaching $75 million, then rates could jump up 25 to 28% is I think what was being said. What are you hearing on that?
You're hitting the nail on the head on all these. Yeah, regarding spouses, the bill would change the price of the plan for spouses of PEIA participants. And it also requires PEIA to return to an 80-20 match during fiscal 2023. There's an administrative fee that acts on. And then it talks about having studies, actuarial studies, gauges on what we've talked about before. In 4 or 5 years, the $600 million is going to need to keep this whole system solvent. It doesn't say where or how we're going to get the money, but now it's time to study it even further. Not that we haven't studied it before, or somebody shouldn't have been studying it all along now. But so yeah, and again, these came, I guess, did come out of committee, but there's still some concern. I saw some concern from AFL-CIO president and others that just think that a lot of this is being bum rushed through.
Yeah, I think that committee meeting lasted something like 15, 20 minutes, and in that time they were able to push out, 4 separate bills, and this PEIA bill that we're talking about is 50-something pages. So, we spent seconds on each page. That doesn't seem like enough time to me.
It seems like what President Blair has set from day one for the Senate, that kind of precedent, and he even said so, in some of the look-aheads that we had for the media before things even started. He says, fasten your seatbelts, it's going to be a bumpy ride, as Betty Davis said. We're going to be trying to be pushing things through, and he's stuck to his word, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, we had him on the program last week, and he said, he was tired of operating at the speed of government, that he's proud of getting them to operate at the speed of business. Not sure the metric there, but that's what Senator Blair is contending.
I mean, when you're talking about business, you're talking about a private entity that has every right to do what it wants to do as it does for its product or service. When you're talking about government, you're talking about things that affect the people of West Virginia in markedly different ways. So I think that the path that you have to take to either one of those is not the same path, but Blair may disagree.
Well, I think that, as someone who has long said that government needed to get, government has a tendency to plod along, but the fact that this is, as journalists and as taxpayers more than anything, we should demand a degree of transparency when it comes to this type of legislating. And we're not seeing that with the PEIA situation. That came out of nowhere. Can't say it came out of nowhere. There's been hints and everything, but there's not been any formal discussion. 50-some page, 60-some page bill, and they're done in 20 minutes, and here it is. Somewhere, someone was talking about that bill and getting it in the form. So where is that transpiring? That's a question all of us should be asking. Not just journalists, but taxpayers. They are spending our money, okay? Bottom line is, it's the taxpayers' money, whether it's severance tax, whether it's personal income tax, car tax, it is the taxpayers of West Virginia's money, and we should demand a degree of transparency so that we're not getting blindsided with bills that could cost millions of dollars to any and all of us. So, Randy, Charles, anything else on the front burner as you see it?
Well, Randy, I wanted to go back to the campus carry bill earlier, and what I had mentioned about the speaker. It sounded like you had a little bit of insight into why that happened. We asked, Speaker Hanshaw about that a couple weeks ago. He didn't really state a strong personal preference one way or the other about the campus carry bill, so I was kind of surprised to see him in that column yesterday.
Yeah, he and one other that voted against it. That was an interesting vote, no doubt about it. And you heard Doug Scaff, and I thought it was interesting. Delegate John Williams, a Democrat out of Monongalia County, read a John Hopkins report and review on the issue that just gave data and research that just showed that in situations where a live shooter is, others having weapons or it being a weapon-free zone didn't help. That campus carry didn't make things safer. That it could cause more gun violence. And the Republicans, to a T, sang on the same sheet of music, just saying that we're not concerned here. I thought Delegate Pritt said, Chris Pritt, we're not concerned with an entity's rights or a municipality's rights. We're concerned with individuals' rights, and I thought that was a bit strange. I thought that the West Virginia legislature is concerned. Yes, I mean there's so many proposals right now about businesses and industry. Heck yeah, they're concerned with those rights. That was a curious statement for me to hear.
Well, and I'm disappointed because again, this is a decision that's being made. A lot of public opposition, and I know that there's public support. I'm not saying that, and we're strong supporters of the Second Amendment in a lot of ways, but the idea of making colleges spend money to create locked areas for people to store their guns when they go to college just doesn't seem like it fits what colleges should be doing, okay? And again, if there's something going on, we want law enforcement there. I mean, put more law enforcement in schools. Fund more campus police, okay? But the idea of untrained gun carriers being able to stop an attack that's well planned is a little bit of a far-fetched thought to me, anyway.
The cost, it's going to cost, I guess, WVU somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000, maybe even more for some of the smaller schools and universities. And then there's insurance liability. What if, God forbid, a student or teacher has an intruder that comes in, an armed shooter, and they shoot back and mistakenly hit another student or a teacher? What happens with liability there for the university? So there's still a lot of unanswered questions with this bill.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, as we wrap up, anything else? 60-second fast break here. Anything on the agenda?
Well, I'm going to follow, I think it's House Resolution 19 to make the pepperoni roll the official food of West Virginia. Now, somebody struck out, had an amendment and struck out giving Jay Rockefeller credit for that because in 1967 he'd helped stop a baker's strike, and they may have outlawed pepperoni rolls forever. So I'll keep my eye on that one.
Well, we're certainly on a roll, but I'd like to add in that, if we're going to make the pepperoni roll the official whatever of West Virginia, I think the West Virginia hot dog with coleslaw and everything has to be right behind there, okay?
Right.
So
1 and 1A.
There you go. Charles, anything from you from the newsroom at WV News?
No, I was just going to say we're going to have a fight between, Clarksburg and Fairmont for the origin of the pepperoni roll there. So that's another wrinkle that we don't want to get in there.
Hey, folks,
everybody's got an opinion on it.
That's it. That's for sure. We may not be able to get bipartisan support on this one, okay? Hey, guys, listen, as always, it's a pleasure. Randy Yohe, the senior governmental affairs reporter with West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Your guys' show on every evening at 6 o'clock, right, Randy?
Big one tonight, yes, sir. Every evening at 6 o'clock, we're going to talk with Mitch Carmichael and Reverend Matthew Watts on economic development and how justice should spend that $700 million of COVID money. That's going to be a good one.
That sounds like a great show. That is 6 o'clock on West Virginia public broadcasting stations across the state for Legislature This Week. Until the next time, let's move West Virginia forward, folks. Have a great week.
Your heart is in the best hands. Mon Health Heart and Vascular is the highest ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose Mon Health. Feel the difference.